The relentless Arizona sun hammers down on the dusty street of Redemption Gulch, bleaching the life from everything it touches. In this forgotten corner of the world, survival is a currency traded daily, and secrets are buried deeper than the town's dry wells. Miss Adeline Hayes, the new schoolteacher from back east, thought she understood the harsh calculus of this land. She was wrong, because today, a man who should be her enemy, a formidable Apache warrior, will collapse at her feet. It's not the arrow in his side that will seal his fate, but something far more sinister, a creeping poison she recognizes from a life she fled. What she doesn't know is that her choice to help him starts a clock, and in 3 days his brothers will come. Not for war, but for an answer. And they believe she has it. Heat radiated in shimmering waves from the compacted earth of Redemption Gulch's only street. It was a suffocating late afternoon heat that silenced the birds and sent even the most hardened prospectors scurrying for the shade of the saloon's porch. Inside the one-room schoolhouse, Adeline Hayes was trying to ignore it. She methodically wiped the slate boards clean, the rhythmic scrape of the wet rag a small, orderly sound in a world that felt perpetually on the verge of chaos. Chalk dust smelling of limestone and dry earth puffed into the thick air, mingling with the scent of old paper and the sun-baked pine of the walls. Adeline had been in Redemption Gulch for 6 months. 6 months of teaching letters and sums to children whose hands were already calloused from chores, whose eyes held a weary pragmatism that belied their years. She had come west from Philadelphia to escape the suffocating expectations of her family and the ghost of a reputation she hadn't earned, but couldn't shake. Her father, a brilliant but disgraced botanist, had filled her head with science and skepticism, things a proper lady was meant to leave to men. Here at the edge of civilization, she hoped that knowledge would be nothing more than a private memory. She craved anonymity, the simple, unexamined life of a frontier school marm. A sudden commotion outside broke her concentration. It wasn't the usual brawl spilling out of the saloon or the clatter of a freight wagon. It was a strangled shout, followed by the panicked whinny of a horse. Adeline set her rag down and moved to the open doorway, her hand instinctively shielding her eyes against the blinding glare. Across the street, Percival Hobbs, the portly owner of the general store, was backing away from something his hands held up, as if to ward off a spirit. Sheriff Emmett Cole, a man whose face seemed permanently carved into a mask of tired resignation, was emerging from his office, his hand resting on the Colt at his hip. Then Adeline saw him. He was an Apache. He stumbled from the narrow alley between the smithy and the assay office, a lone figure moving with a painful lurching gait. He was tall and powerfully built, his bare chest and arms slick with sweat and streaked with dirt. A single arrow was lodged high in his left side, just below the ribcage, its dark feather, fletching stark against his copper skin. But it wasn't the arrow that held Adeline's gaze. It was the way he moved, not like a man wounded, but like a man poisoned. His limbs were uncoordinated, his head lolling. His eyes, when they briefly swept across the street, were glazed with a feverish intensity that spoke of a battle being fought within. He took 3 more halting steps before his legs gave out. He fell to one knee, then pitched forward, landing hard in the thick dust directly in front of the schoolhouse. The street went silent, the only sound the soft, rhythmic puff of the blacksmith's bellows, which now seemed unnervingly like a failing heartbeat. The townsfolk who had been hiding from the heat now emerged, drawn by the drama. They formed a wary semicircle, keeping their distance. Whispers skittered through the crowd. "It's one of Goyakla's band," someone hissed. "What's he doing here alone?" another murmured. Sheriff Cole approached cautiously, his revolver, now drawn but pointed at the ground. Dr. Elias Gable, smelling faintly of whiskey and carbolic acid, pushed his way through the onlookers, his medical bag slapping against his leg. "Well now," Gable said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Looks like some brave soul did the territory a favor." He nudged the fallen man with the toe of his boot. The warrior didn't stir. "He's still breathing, Doc," Sheriff Cole stated, his voice flat. "See what you can do." Gable knelt, making a show of his reluctance. He grunted as he examined the arrow. "Torn through some muscle. Nasty, but I've seen worse. Probably bled out internally." He made no move to tend to the wound. His diagnosis was a dismissal. Adeline watched from her doorway, a cold dread coiling in her stomach. It wasn't the blood. It was the unnatural stillness of the man's powerful form, the faint, almost imperceptible tremor in his limbs. She saw the skin around the wound. It wasn't just inflamed. It was turning a sickly bruised purple with faint web-like black veins spreading outwards from the puncture. Her mind, unbidden, flew back 20 years to her father's cluttered study, to a detailed illustration in a heavy leather-bound book. An illustration of a rare, toxic flower. "It's not the arrow," Adeline said, her voice clearer and louder than she intended. Every head turned towards her. Sheriff Cole's eyebrows rose in surprise. Dr. Gable shot her a look of pure venom. "Ma'am." The doctor sneered. "I believe I am the one with the medical degree. You stick to your chalk and primers." Adeline ignored him, her gaze fixed on the wound. She stepped out of the schoolhouse and into the oppressive heat, her sensible boots sinking into the dust. She knelt on the other side of the warrior, the heat of the ground seeping through the fabric of her skirt. "Look at the skin," she insisted, pointing. Her hand trembled slightly, but her voice was firm. "The discoloration, the necrosis, spreading from the entry point. A clean arrow wound doesn't do that. And the smell..." She leaned closer, catching a faint, cloyingly sweet odor like rotting fruit. "He's been poisoned. The arrowhead was treated." Dr. Gable scoffed. "Poison, that savage superstition. He's dying of blood loss and infection, plain and simple. Best to just let it happen. Less trouble for all of us." "Oh, if we let it happen," Adeline countered, her eyes flashing as she looked up at Sheriff Cole. "His people will assume we did this, or that we let him die. He's one of the chief's sons. I've seen him before at the trading post. His name is Cale." The name hung in the air heavy with implication. Killing a random warrior was one thing. The son of a chief dying in the middle of their main street was an invitation to war. Sheriff Cole's weary expression hardened with concern. He holstered his pistol and looked from the dismissive doctor to the insistent schoolteacher. He didn't understand botany or medicine, but he understood politics, and the politics of a chief's son dying on his doorstep were bad. "The schoolmarm has a point, Doc," Cole said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We can't just leave him here. Help me get him to your office." "My office?" Gable sputtered. "I'm not having him bleed all over my floor. Take him to the jail cell if you must." "He's not a criminal. He's a wounded man," Adeline snapped. She looked around frantically. "The schoolhouse. We can take him there. I have a cot in the back storeroom." The sheriff hesitated for only a second. It was unconventional, but it was a solution. "All right, Miss Hayes. But you understand what you're inviting in." "I understand that a man is dying," she replied, her gaze returning to Cale's still form. She didn't know if she could save him. The poison her father had studied was notoriously fast-acting and potent, but she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that if she did nothing, the consequences would be far worse than a bloodstain on a wooden floor. She had come to the West seeking peace, and now it seemed she was about to find herself at the very center of a war. The storeroom of the schoolhouse was small and smelled of chalk dust and dried ink. It was Adeline's sanctuary, a tiny space where she kept a cot for the nights she worked too late to walk back to her rented room at the boarding house. Now it was a makeshift infirmary. Sheriff Cole and a reluctant blacksmith named Gus had carried Cale in, laying him gently on the narrow bed. The warrior remained unconscious, his breathing shallow and ragged. Dr. Gable had followed them, grumbling under his breath. He pulled the arrow out with a single brutal tug, causing Cale to arch his back with a silent scream. The doctor swabbed the wound with whiskey, bandaged it crudely, and declared his work done. "There," he announced, wiping his hands on an already soiled rag. "I've done what I can. He'll either live or he won't. Nature of things." He looked pointedly at Adeline. "Don't come crying to me when he wakes up and decides to scalp you for your troubles, school marm." With that, he packed his bag and left, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Adeline stared at the bandage already darkening with blood. She knew the doctor's work was dangerously incomplete. The real fight wasn't against the wound, it was against the toxin coursing through Cale's veins. "Sheriff," she said softly, not taking her eyes off the patient. "I need some things from the general store, and I'll need hot water, lots of it." Sheriff Cole looked at her, his expression a mixture of doubt and reluctant trust. "What are you planning, Miss Hayes?" "I'm planning on saving his life," she stated simply, "and maybe the town's along with it." She handed him a list: willow bark for fever charcoal, and most importantly, a bottle of the strongest, purest grain alcohol Percival Hobbs had in stock. The sheriff studied the list, then her face, and with a slow nod he departed, leaving Adeline alone with the dying man. She worked quickly, efficiently. She lit the small pot-bellied stove in the corner of the schoolhouse, the heat adding to the already stifling air. When the sheriff returned with the supplies and a bucket of steaming water from the boarding house, she was ready. She removed Gable's clumsy bandage, her touch gentle but firm. The flesh around the wound was hot to the touch, the dark veins spreading like cracks in porcelain. This was the moment of truth. She closed her eyes, and the memory she had suppressed for so long surfaced with perfect clarity. Her father, his hands stained with chlorophyll, holding up a delicate trumpet-shaped flower, its petals the color of a bruised twilight. Datura stramonium, he had called it by its scientific name. Jimson weed, devil's breath. He had lectured her on its properties, his eyes gleaming with academic fervor. A powerful hallucinogen, a deliriant. But in concentrated form, processed from the roots and seeds, it was a potent cardiotoxin. It attacked the nervous system, paralyzed the muscles, and stopped the heart. There was no known cure, he'd told her, only folk remedies of dubious efficacy. But he had a theory, a radical one. He believed the toxin could be fought not by an antidote, but by aggressive filtration, and by supporting the body's own desperate attempts to fight it. Adeline opened her eyes, her resolve hardened. Her father's theories had cost him his university post and his reputation, but she had always believed him. Now she would test them. She ground the charcoal into a fine powder and mixed it with water to create a thick black slurry. Charcoal, her father had taught her, was a powerful absorbent. It wouldn't neutralize the poison, but it might bind to it in the blood, slowing its spread. She packed the foul-smelling poultice directly into and around the open wound, ignoring the way the flesh seemed to crawl at her touch. Next, she brewed a bitter tea from the willow bark. Salicin, a natural pain reliever and fever reducer. She gently lifted Kyle's head, trying to get a few spoonfuls of the cooled liquid past his lips. Most of it dribbled down his chin, but some went down. It was a start. For hours she worked. She cleaned the wound repeatedly with the harsh grain alcohol, fighting the infection that was already setting in. She replaced the charcoal poultices, bathed Kyle's feverish skin with cool water, and forced more of the willow bark tea down his throat. The room grew dark, lit only by the flickering orange glow of a single kerosene lamp that cast long dancing shadows on the walls. Outside the town of Redemption, Gulch held its breath. People spoke in hushed tones, casting anxious glances towards the schoolhouse windows. They saw Adeline's silhouette moving back and forth, a lone sentinel in the night. To them she was a mystery, the quiet, educated woman who kept to herself, now engaged in a life-or-death struggle with a man they considered their mortal enemy. Sometime after midnight, Kyle began to thrash. His eyes flew open, but they were unseeing, lost in some terrible poison-induced nightmare. He muttered in his native tongue, his words sharp and guttural. A name, or something like a name, escaped his lips, repeated over and over. It meant nothing to Adeline, but she filed it away. His fever spiked. His body was slick with sweat, his muscles clenched as hard as stone. This was the crisis. The poison was at the height of its power, battling for control of his heart. Adeline felt a surge of despair. She was out of her depth, a schoolteacher playing at being a doctor, guided only by the fading memories of a disgraced botanist. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling the frantic, irregular hammering of his heart. It was faltering. "No," she whispered, her voice fierce in the quiet room. "You will not die here. You will not let them win." She didn't know who they were, the one who fired the arrow, or the townspeople who would let him die, or the ghosts of her own past. It didn't matter. In that moment, he was not an Apache warrior, and she was not a schoolteacher. They were two people fighting against a darkness that threatened to consume them both. She redoubled her efforts, her movements fueled by a desperate, stubborn anger. She forced more of the alcohol into the wound, the sting so severe that Cale cried out a raw animal sound of pure agony that cut through his delirium. His eyes, for a fleeting second, seemed to clear. They focused on her face, confusion warring with the fever. Then the haze descended again, and he slumped back onto the cot, his body going limp. For a terrifying moment, Adeline thought his heart had stopped. She pressed her ear to his chest, her own heart pounding in her throat. She heard nothing. Then a faint, slow beat, and another, and another. It was weak, dangerously so, but it was steady. The frantic, irregular rhythm was gone. His breathing deepened, becoming less ragged. The violent tremors ceased. The fever had not broken, but the crisis for now had passed. He had survived the worst of the poison's assault. Adeline sank onto the small stool beside the cot, utterly exhausted. Her dress was stained with blood and charcoal, her hands raw from the alcohol. She looked at the warrior's face, peaceful now in the lamplight. She had crossed a line. She had intervened not just in a man's life, but in the delicate, violent balance of the frontier. One day had passed. She knew with a chilling certainty that she had only 2 more before his brothers came looking for him, and she would have to have an answer for them. Dawn broke on the second day, painting the eastern sky in shades of pale rose and dusty orange. The light crept into the schoolhouse, illuminating a scene of quiet exhaustion. Adeline had not slept. She sat slumped on the stool, her head resting against the wall next to Cale's cot. His fever had receded slightly, and his breathing remained steady. He was alive, but the battle was far from over. The town awoke with a nervous energy. The story of the schoolteacher and the Apache had spread like wildfire. When Adeline emerged from the schoolhouse in the early morning to fetch fresh water, The stares followed her like a physical weight. Faces peered from behind lace curtains. Men stopped talking as she passed, their eyes narrowed with suspicion and fear. Percival Hobbs was sweeping the porch of his general store, but his movements were a pretense. He was watching her. "Morning, Miss Hayes," he called out, his tone overly casual. "Heard you had a guest." "He's my patient, Mr. Hobbs," Adeline replied coolly, not breaking her stride. "Patient." Hobbs scoffed under his breath, but loud enough for her to hear. "Folks are saying you're courting trouble. Big trouble. What if his war party is just over that ridge, waiting for a signal?" Adeline stopped and turned to face him. "And what if the man who shot him is right here in this town, waiting to see if his poison does the job? Did anyone consider that?" Hobbs's eyes widened slightly. The idea was so contrary to their ingrained narrative of savage attackers and civilized victims that it momentarily stunned him. He had no reply, and Adeline continued on her way. Her defiance, however, only fueled the town's anxiety. Later that morning, a delegation appeared at the schoolhouse door. It was led by Sterling Croft, the owner of the largest ranch in the territory, the Seabar Ranch. Croft was a man who radiated an aura of success and ruthless ambition. He was handsome in a severe way, with cold blue eyes and a posture that was ramrod straight. He considered himself the town's unofficial leader, its benefactor and protector, though most of his benefactions seemed to benefit his own land holdings. He was flanked by two of his ranch hands, burly men with pistols strapped to their hips. "Miss Hayes," Croft began, his voice smooth but with an undercurrent of steel. He removed his expensive Stetson hat, a gesture of politeness that didn't reach his eyes. "We've come out of concern. For your safety and the safety of this town." "I am perfectly safe, Mr. Croft," Adeline said, blocking the doorway. "Are you?" he pressed. "You have a known hostile in your care. An Apache. Do you have any idea what his people are capable of? The council has met. We believe it's best for everyone if the sheriff removes him from town limits. We can leave him where his people will find him." "Leave him to die, you mean?" Adeline shot back. "He's in no condition to be moved. It would kill him." "A risk some of us are willing to take," Croft said, his smile tightening. "His presence here is a provocation. It endangers our women, our children, the very children you are paid to teach." It was a veiled threat, and Adeline felt a flash of cold anger. "The only danger I see, Mr. Croft, is from prejudice and fear. A wounded man needs help. It is as simple as that." Croft's eyes swept past her, trying to get a glimpse inside the schoolhouse. "Your compassion is admirable, Miss Hayes, but it is tragically misplaced. This is not Philadelphia. Out here, sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford. Think carefully about whose side you are on." He placed his hat back on his head, a gesture of finality. The delegation turned and walked away, leaving Adeline with a profound sense of unease. Croft wasn't just a concerned citizen. There was something predatory in his gaze, an intensity that went beyond simple fear of an Apache reprisal. Her confrontation with Croft solidified her position as an outcast. Parents kept their children home from school. The boarding house owner informed her that her room might not be available for much longer, citing the comfort of the other guests. Adeline was being isolated, the town silently and collectively turning its back on her. Her only visitor that day was Sheriff Cole. He brought a tray with a plate of stew and a chunk of bread, setting it down just inside the door. "The town's getting restless, Miss Hayes," he said, his voice low. "Croft is stirring them up, talking about forming a militia for protection." "Protection from what? A man who can't even stand?" Adeline retorted, her voice weary. "Protection from what he represents. the sheriff corrected gently. And from who might be coming for him? You said his brothers would come. You still believe that? I know it, she said. 3 days. That is the custom, to allow a lost hunter time to return. After that they search. Tomorrow is the 3rd day. The sheriff ran a hand over his face. Then we don't have much time. Has he said anything? Anything at all? Adeline thought of the delirious muttering from the night before. He said a word, "Tsona-in," over and over. Cole frowned in concentration, then his eyes lit with a spark of recognition. Tsona-in, the eagle killer. That's what the Apache call Sterling Croft. Adeline felt a chill despite the heat. Why, a couple of years back, Croft and his men claimed they were attacked by a golden eagle on their land. Said it was carrying off a lamb. They shot it. A golden eagle. To his ranch hands, it was just a big bird. To the Apache, it's a sacred messenger. They've considered him a man of bad omen ever since. A man who kills sacred things. The pieces began to click into place, forming a disturbing picture. Croft the man, so eager to have Cale removed. Croft the man the Apache called the Eagle Killer. The connection was tenuous, but it was there. That evening, as twilight settled, Kyle's fever finally broke. Adeline was changing his poultice when his eyes fluttered open. This time they were clear. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, then slowly turned his head, his gaze falling upon her. His eyes held no fear, only a deep, penetrating intelligence. He tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Adeline held a cup of water to his lips, and he drank greedily. "Where?" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "You're in the schoolhouse," Adeline said softly, "in the town." His eyes widened slightly with alarm. He tried to sit up, a flash of the warrior's instinct returning, but the effort was too much. He fell back, grimacing in pain. "You were wounded," Adeline explained. "Shot with a poisoned arrow. You've been here for 2 days." He looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. He saw the fatigue etched around her eyes, the charcoal stains on her hands. He looked at the clean bandage on his side. He was a man trained to read signs, and the signs here told a story of tireless care. "You," he said the single word, a question and a statement. "My name is Adeline Hayes." He held her gaze for a long moment, a silent communication passing between them. It was not gratitude, not yet. It was assessment, acknowledgement. "My brothers," he finally whispered, his voice gaining a little strength. "They will come." "I know," Adeline said. "They will come tomorrow." A shadow of deep concern crossed his face. "They will come for answers," he said, his words heavy with meaning. "This poison, it is not of my people." And with that statement, the entire situation shifted. It wasn't a tribal dispute. The arrow was a deception. Someone else, someone who understood both the white man's poisons and the Apache's customs, had set this in motion. Someone who wanted a war. Adeline looked out the window into the gathering darkness, her thoughts turning once again to the cold, ambitious eyes of Sterling Croft, the Eagle Killer. Tomorrow was the 3rd day, and the storm was about to break. The 3rd day dawned with an oppressive stillness. The air was thick and heavy, the sky a hazy metallic grey. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. In Redemption, Gulch and armed truce seemed to be in effect. Men stood in tight, watchful groups, rifles held loosely in their hands. Sterling Croft and his C-Bar ranch hands patrolled the main street, their presence a mixture of civic duty and outright provocation. Every eye was turned eastward, towards the low, sun-baked mesas. Inside the schoolhouse, Kyle was sitting up, propped against the wall. The poison had left him weak, but the iron will of the warrior was reasserting itself. He had eaten a little broth and spoken to Adeline in short, clipped sentences, confirming his suspicions. The arrow's fletching was designed to mimic that of the Pima, a rival tribe with whom his people had a long-standing, bitter feud. But the poison, the devil's breath, was not a weapon the Pima used. It was, as he put it, white man's sorcery. "They want my people to blame the Pima," Kyle had explained, his voice a low rasp. "Or they want your town to kill me. Either way, a fire is lit." Just after midday they came. They were not a war party, not the whooping horde of Croft's fearful predictions. They were 3 riders appearing as dark specks on the horizon, and growing, steadily resolving into figures of stark, imposing dignity. They rode not with aggression, but with a grim, relentless purpose. They stopped at the edge of town, their horses stamping impatiently in the dust. The man in the lead was older, his face a mask of chiseled granite, his long hair streaked with silver. This was Sorin Cale's eldest brother and the tribe's war chief. Beside him rode a younger man whose eyes burned with a volatile fire. This was Rorik the youngest, known for his quick temper and fierce loyalty. The third rider stayed slightly behind a scout whose eyes missed nothing. Sheriff Cole walked out to meet them, his hands held open and away from his sides. "I am the law in this town," he called out, his voice steady. "State your purpose." Sorin's gaze was like a physical blow. It swept over Cole, over the armed townsfolk, and settled on the schoolhouse. "We seek our brother Kyle. He came this way 3 days ago. We find his horse, but not him. We come for him, or for news of his body." From the porch of the general store, Sterling Croft stepped forward, his rifle held at a casual port. "He's here!" Croft called out, his voice ringing with authority. "But you're not getting him. He's a prisoner, a spy. You turn your horses around and ride back to your reservation, or you'll be joining him in a pine box." Rorik's hand flew to the knife at his belt, a snarl twisting his lips. Sorin put a hand on his arm, a small restraining gesture that spoke volumes of his control. "He is no spy," Sorin's voice boomed, cutting through the tense air. "He is the son of our chief. If he is harmed, this town will burn. This I swear on the spirits of my ancestors." The tension ratcheted up to a breaking point. The townspeople tightened their grips on their rifles. Rorik looked ready to charge. "Enough!" The voice came from the schoolhouse door. Adeline stood there, her simple dress looking out of place amidst the bristling weapons. Beside her, leaning heavily on the doorframe, was Kyle. He was pale and unsteady, but he was alive, and he was standing. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Sorin and Rorik's eyes widened their stony expressions, breaking with shock and relief. Kyle raised a hand in greeting to his brothers. "I am here, my brothers," Kyle called out, his voice weak but clear. "I am not a prisoner. This woman, she saved my life." The declaration stunned everyone into silence. Croft stared, his face a thunderous mask of disbelief and fury. The townspeople looked from the Apache warrior to the schoolteacher, their simple narrative of good versus evil shattering before their eyes. Sorin dismounted, his movements deliberate and regal. He walked towards the schoolhouse, his eyes fixed on his brother, then on Adeline. He stopped before her, his gaze intense and searching. He was so close she could see the intricate beadwork on his leather vest and smell the faint scent of wood smoke and sage that clung to him. "You are the woman who did this?" he asked, his English formal and precise. "I am," Adeline said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Why, because he was dying," she answered simply, "and his death would have served a liar's purpose." Sorin's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "The arrow that struck my brother was fletched like a Pima arrow." Kyle interjected, his voice gaining strength. but it was tipped with a poison that is not known to them, a poison from this land, the devil's breath. Sorin's gaze flickered towards Sterling Croft, and for a second Adeline saw a flash of understanding, a deep and ancient hatred. He looked back at Sheriff Cole. "Our quarrel is not with this town," Sorin announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the street. "Not yet. Our quarrel is with the one who hides behind a coward's weapon, the one who tried to light a fire between our peoples, the one who shot my brother from ambush." He turned his piercing gaze, sweeping over the armed men. "We know the poison is not Apache. That means it is one of you. You have a snake in your midst." Rorik dismounted, his hand still resting on his knife. "We will find this snake, brother," he said, his eyes burning with vengeful fire. "We will cut its head off." "We will," Sorin agreed. He then looked directly at Sheriff Cole, issuing a challenge and an offer. "We will give you a truce, 3 more days. You will use your law to find the man who did this. And this woman," he nodded towards Adeline, "she will help you. She knows the poison. She saw the wound. She is the key." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You will find him and give him to us for our justice. Or in 3 days we will return, and we will find him ourselves. If your town stands in our way, it will fall. This is my word." Sheriff Cole looked at Cale, alive and standing. He looked at Adeline, her face pale but determined, and he looked at Sterling Croft, whose expression was one of barely concealed rage. The choice was clear: a partnership with the Apaches to find a hidden assassin, or a war against them to protect a man like Croft. "You have your truce," the sheriff declared, his voice firm. 3 days. We find him together." Sorin gave a single sharp nod. The immediate threat of bloodshed had passed, but it had been replaced by something far more complex and dangerous: a ticking clock, a murder investigation, and an alliance between 3 Apache warriors, a frontier sheriff, and a Philadelphia schoolteacher. The fate of Redemption Gulch now rested on their shoulders. The first day of the truce was a study in mistrust. The schoolhouse became the unlikely headquarters for the investigation. Sorin, Rorik, and Kyle sat on one side of the room, a silent, watchful triumvirate. Sheriff Cole paced the floorboards on the other, while Adeline stood between them, a bridge over a chasm of cultural and personal animosity. Rorik was the first to voice his skepticism. "We trust them," he muttered to Sorin in their native tongue, his eyes fixed on the sheriff. "The man with the metal star. His people and Croft's are the same." "He gave his word," Sorin replied, his voice low and firm. "And the woman, she has honor. Kyle lives because of her. We will listen." Sheriff Cole, for his part, was wrestling with his own prejudices. He was a lawman, and this felt like collaborating with the very men he was often tasked with pursuing. Yet he couldn't deny the logic of Sorin's ultimatum or the sincerity in Adeline's eyes. "All right," Cole began, breaking the tense silence. "Let's start with what we know. The weapon was an arrow fletched to look Pima. The location was the rocky pass about 5 miles east of here. Kyle was traveling alone." He looked at Kyle. "Did you see who shot you?" Kyle shook his head. "The shot came from the rocks above, from behind. A coward's shot. I didn't see him. I only felt the sting. Then the fire in my blood." "The poison," Adeline said, stepping forward. "That's our best clue. Datura stramonium. Devil's breath. It's not a simple thing to weaponize. The toxin is concentrated in the roots and seeds. It has to be harvested at the right time, processed correctly, to create a stable, potent paste. This wasn't done by some amateur. Whoever did this has knowledge." "Knowledge of plants," Cole mused. "That doesn't narrow it down much. Anyone could have a garden. No, Adeline insisted. More than that, a specific knowledge. My father used to say that any man can grow a weed, but it takes a scientist or a shaman to turn it into a precise poison. It must be cooked, rendered, mixed with an adherent, so it sticks to the arrowhead. It's a craft. Sorin listened intently. Our healers know the plants of this land. We know the devil's breath. We use it in small ways for visions. But to make a killing poison from it, that is a dark craft, a perversion. We know no one who does this. So the killer is a white man, Cole stated. One with a deep knowledge of botany or access to someone who does. And a motive. Adeline added her eyes, meeting the sheriff's. Who gains the most if the Apache and the Pima go to war, or if the Apache attack this town? The unspoken name hung in the air, Sterling Croft. His Seabar Ranch borders the southern edge of the reservation, Cole thought aloud. The best grazing land and the only year-round water source for 50 miles is on that Apache land, the San Pedro Spring. If the army were to pacify the reservation, that land would be opened up. Croft would be the first in line to claim it. He is the eagle killer. Kyle rasped his hand, resting on his bandaged side. He has a black heart, but suspicion is not proof. Then we find proof, Sorin declared, his voice ringing with authority. He stood up, a commanding presence in the small room. We will ride to the pass where Kyle was attacked. My scout is already there. He will read the ground. You, he pointed at Cole, will search the town, search for this craft. And you, his gaze fell on Adeline, will tell us more about this poison. What does it take to make it? What tools? What supplies? The plan was set. The alliance, however fragile, had a purpose. While Sorin and Rorik rode out with the sheriff to the pass, Adeline and Cale remained at the schoolhouse. An awkward silence fell between them. Adeline busied herself changing Cale's dressing, her movements clinical and professional. Your hands are skilled, Kyle observed, his voice quiet, like a healer's. My father was a man of science, Adeline replied, her focus on the bandage. He taught me. This science, it is powerful. It fought the dark magic. It's not magic, she corrected gently. It's chemistry, understanding how things work. He looked at her, a faint, curious smile touching his lips. To my people, understanding how things work is the greatest magic of all. Their conversation was a tentative exploration, a mapping of the boundaries between their two worlds. Adeline in turn asked him about the fletching on the arrow, about the customs of his people, about the name Eagle Killer. With each question and answer, a sliver of the wall between them dissolved. He saw not a helpless white woman, but a person of knowledge and courage. She saw not a savage, but a man of deep intelligence and pride, burdened by the weight of his people's survival. By late afternoon, the others returned. Sorin carried a small leather pouch. He emptied its contents onto the schoolhouse table. Inside were several spent rifle cartridges and a single distinctive button made of polished silver. The ground tells a story, Sorin said. The shooter waited on a high ledge. He used a rifle rest, 2 stones placed just so. He was patient. After he fired his arrow, Kyle's horse bolted. The shooter fired his rifle at the horse to keep it from running back to our camp. Sheriff Cole picked up one of the cartridges, 45-70 government, the kind of shell a Sharp's rifle uses. A buffalo gun, a long-range weapon. Many men own such a rifle, Kyle noted. But this button, Sorin said, pushing the silver object forward, this is not common. Adeline picked it up. It was heavy, intricately engraved with the image of a C wrapped around a B. Seabar, she breathed. It's from a coat or a vest from the Seabar Ranch. Sheriff Cole's face hardened. It's circumstantial. Croft will say he lost it anywhere. Then we look for the other proof, Adeline said, her mind racing. The poison. To process devil's breath, you need a secluded place to work away from prying eyes. You need a heat source, grinding tools, glass vials for storage. You'd need a mortar and pestle, perhaps a small furnace or a chemist's burner. Tools not found in a bunkhouse, Cole finished for her. Croft has a large private ranch house, miles from anywhere. But how do we get onto his land? The sheriff wondered. He'll have guards posted. He's expecting us to be watching him. Rorik, who had been silent and brooding, finally spoke. We do not need to go through the front gate. He looked at his brothers. The bluffs to the north of his ranch house, they are steep, but not impossible to climb. We can approach from behind, under the cover of darkness. It's too risky, Cole argued. If you're caught on his land, he'd be within his rights to shoot you. Being cautious will not find the snake before the truce ends, Sorin stated, his decision made. We will go tonight. You, he looked at the sheriff, will create a diversion in town, something to draw the attention of Croft and his men. The rest of us will search the ranch house. It was a daring, reckless plan. An Apache war chief, his two brothers, and a Philadelphia schoolteacher breaking into the most powerful man's home in the territory. Adeline felt a tremor of fear, but it was overshadowed by a stronger feeling, a relentless drive for the truth. She looked at Cale, then at Sorin. I'm going with you, she said. No, Kyle said immediately. It is too dangerous. You need me? Adeline countered, her voice unwavering. You are looking for a botanist's workshop. You won't know what to look for. I will. I know the tools, the residue, the smell. I can find what you cannot. Sorin studied her for a long, silent moment. He saw not fear in her eyes, but resolve, the same resolve that had kept his brother alive. She is right, he said, finally, overruling Cale's objection. She has honor, and she has knowledge. She will come. Tonight we find the eagle killer's nest. The moon was a sliver offering little light as they tethered their horses in a grove of cottonwoods a mile from the Seabar ranch house. The night was cool and silent, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind through the dry grass. Adeline's heart pounded a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She was dressed in a dark skirt and blouse, her hair tied back a small satchel with flint and steel at her side. Kyle, though still weak, had insisted on coming. This is my fight, he had said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He moved with a stiff grace, his hand never far from the knife at his belt. Sorin led the way, his steps silent and sure, while the volatile energy of Rorik seemed to be contained by the sheer gravity of their mission. They skirted the main path, moving through the deep shadows at the edge of the grazing fields. As they neared the imposing ranch house, they heard the distant sounds from town, a series of gunshots, followed by loud shouting. Sheriff Cole's diversion. Adeline pictured the weary lawman firing his pistol into the air, creating a panic to draw Croft and his men away from their stronghold. The cliffs behind the house were just as Rorik had described, steep and treacherous, but Sorin found a path, a narrow fissure in the rock that offered handholds and footholds. He went first, followed by Rorik, then he helped Adeline, his grip strong and steadying. Kyle came last, his movements slow but determined. From the top of the bluff, the ranch lay spread out below them like a map. The main house was dark, but a single light burned in a smaller separate building behind it, a glass-walled structure that Adeline immediately recognized. A greenhouse, she whispered, her voice tight with excitement. It was the perfect place to cultivate sensitive plants, to conduct experiments away from the main house. They descended the other side, and moved like shadows across the manicured yard, the soft grass muffling their footsteps. The greenhouse door was locked. Rorik, without a word, slid a thin knife from his boot and worked the simple lock. It clicked open with a soft snick. The air inside was thick, humid, and smelled of damp earth and blooming flowers, but beneath it all was another scent, faint but unmistakable to Adeline, the cloyingly sweet, rotten fruit smell of devil's breath. The greenhouse was filled with exotic plants, a bizarre collection for the Arizona territory. Orchids and strange ferns grew in abundance, but in the far corner, separated from the others, was a section of carefully tended trumpet-flowered plants, Datura stramonium. "Here," Adeline whispered, pointing. On a workbench next to the plants lay the evidence they sought, a brass mortar and pestle stained with a dark resinous substance, glass vials, one of which still contained a small amount of the black tarry poison, a stack of arrowheads, and most damningly, a half-finished arrow. Its shaft was bare, but next to it lay a bundle of dyed feathers, the exact color and pattern of the Pima fletching. "We have him," Sorin said, his voice a low growl of satisfaction. Suddenly the greenhouse door creaked open. A ranch hand stood silhouetted against the night sky, a lantern in one hand, a shotgun in the other. He had clearly been left behind as a guard. His eyes widened as he saw the intruders. Before he could raise the alarm, Rorik moved with blinding speed. He crossed the room in 2 bounds, slamming the man against the wall. The shotgun clattered to the floor. The man let out a choked cry, but Rorik's hand was over his mouth. "What do we do with him?" Rorik hissed. From the direction of the main house, a voice called out. "Rodrigo? What was that noise?" Footsteps crunched on the gravel path. They were trapped. "Out the back," Sorin commanded. Adeline grabbed the half-finished arrow and the vial of poison, shoving them into her satchel. Kyle kicked open a back panel of the greenhouse, made of wood, not glass, and they scrambled out into the darkness, just as Sterling Croft himself appeared at the front door, lantern held high. "They're here," the captured guard yelled, finding his voice. Croft saw them, fleeting shadows disappearing into the night. "Don't let them escape," he roared. Gunshots erupted behind them. Adeline ran her lungs, burning the sounds of shouting and gunfire chasing them across the yard. They scrambled back towards the bluffs, their only escape route. A bullet whizzed past Adeline's ear, so close she felt its heat. Kyle shoved her forward towards the rocks. "Go!" he yelled. Rorik and Sorin were already climbing, providing covering fire with the 2 pistols they carried. Adeline found the fissure and began to climb, her hands raw, her mind numb with terror. Kyle was right behind her. As they neared the top, a rifle shot louder than the others rang out from below. Kyle cried out, his body lurching. His grip on the rock face slipped. He was falling. "Kyle!" Adeline screamed, reaching down her hand, grabbing his wrist. She held on her arm, screaming in protest, the weight of him threatening to pull her down with him. He had been shot in the leg, his blood warm and slick on her hand. Below, Croft was reloading his Sharps rifle, taking careful aim. He was going to finish the job. But from the top of the bluff, an arrow hissed through the night air. It struck Croft's rifle, the force of the impact, knocking it from his grasp. The gun fired uselessly into the ground. Sorin stood at the precipice, another arrow already knocked in his bow, a figure of righteous fury against the night sky. Rorik grabbed Kyle's other arm, and together, he and Adeline hauled the wounded warrior to the top of the bluff. They didn't stop. They half-dragged, half-carried Kyle back towards the horses, as Croft and his men were forced to find a way around the cliffs. They reached the cottonwood grove and mounted up. Kyle slumped over his saddle, conscious, but grimacing in pain. They rode hard, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them as they melted into the vast, dark wilderness. They had the proof, but they had paid for it in blood. The truce was shattered, and Sterling Croft the Eagle Killer now knew that they knew his secret. The final confrontation was no longer a matter of if, but when. And it would not be a negotiation, it would be a battle for survival. They rode back at dawn not for vengeance but for truth. The proof, the vial of poison, the Pima-style feathers, and the half-finished arrow was a heavy weight in Adeline's satchel. Their arrival in Redemption Gulch was a spark to tinder. The main street filled with armed townspeople, facing off against Sterling Croft and his men, who formed a belligerent line before the saloon. Sheriff Cole moved to intercept them, his face a mask of grim anticipation. Before he could speak, Sorin dismounted, strode to the center of the street, and held the evidence high for all to see. "People of Redemption Gulch," his voice boomed, cutting through the tense silence. "You have feared the wrong enemy. The man who tried to poison my brother and start a war stands among you." He brandished the arrow and the vial. These were found in a greenhouse on the Seabar Ranch. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. Croft let out a harsh, barking laugh. The lies of a savage they were trespassing. They planted it to save their own skins. Adeline stepped forward, her voice clear and steady, a counterpoint to Croft's bluster. "He is the liar. Ask him why he cultivates devil's breath. He would sacrifice every one of you for the water rights on Apache land." Her accusation struck home. The townspeople looked from the resolute schoolteacher to the furious rancher, and for the first time they saw the greed behind his confident facade. Seeing his authority crumble, Croft roared in fury, leveling his Sharps rifle directly at Sorin. Before he could pull the trigger, a single sharp shot cracked the morning air. It came not from Croft's rifle, but from Sheriff Cole's Colt. The bullet struck Croft in the shoulder, spinning him around as his own weapon fired harmlessly into the sky. He staggered back, his face a mask of disbelief and pain. With their leader wounded and his deception exposed, the Seabar men hesitated, their loyalty dissolving in the face of truth. One by one they lowered their guns. The battle was over before it had truly begun. A fragile peace settled on the town in the following days. With Croft locked in the jail awaiting a federal judge, Cale, Sorin, and Rorick came to the schoolhouse to make their farewell. Kyle, leaning on his horse but standing tall, met Adeline's gaze. The space between them was no longer filled with suspicion, but with a profound, unspoken understanding. "You are a healer, Adeline Hayes," Kyle said, his voice soft but clear. "You healed my body, and you helped heal the peace between our peoples. We are in your debt." He reached out his fingertips, brushing the back of her hand in a gesture of immense respect that transcended words. Adeline watched them mount their horses. They rode east not as enemies departing, but as allies who had faced the darkness together. As their figures shrank against the vast horizon, she stood before her schoolhouse, the dust settling on the quiet street. She had come to the west seeking anonymity, but had found her purpose in the heart of a storm. And for the first time, Redemption Gulch felt like home. And so the story of Redemption Gulch concludes not with the roar of a bloody war, but with the quiet dawn of a fragile peace. It's a powerful reminder that in the Old West, the greatest battles weren't always fought with bullets and arrows, but with courage, truth, and the willingness to see the humanity in an enemy's eyes. Adeline Hayes, the unassuming schoolteacher, proved that knowledge could be a more powerful weapon than any rifle, and that one person's integrity could change the course of history for an entire town. What do you think, was Adeline brave or reckless? Could a peace like that ever truly last on the frontier? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of unlikely heroes and hidden truths resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good Western drama, and be sure to subscribe for more tales from the dusty trails of American history. Thanks for listening.